Hello, listeners. Welcome to this episode of Cryptonomics. Before we jump into today's discussion, please keep in mind this recording is for general education and is not intended to constitute investment advice. Any opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of Withum. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Cryptonomics. Today's episode is a special feature that was previously recorded as part of Withum's annual technology summit. This conversation is from September 2022, and I sit down with a colleague of mine, Ryan Babiak, who is a tax partner here at Withum within our technology and emerging growth practice. Ryan is also one of our firm leaders in our digital asset practice, particularly from a tax perspective. In today's discussion, we cover a variety of topics. Starting with the first 25 minutes or so, we kick off with things like the state of the market, where we give a brief audit, tax, and regulatory update. We go into a little bit the current pricing outlook for 2022 compared to where we were this time last year. We also go into high level what the Ethereum merge was and how it's impacting the current market. Give a brief update on NFTs, the state of the industry as far as they're concerned, particularly from their massive rise in 2021 compared to where we are in 2022 is sort of a cooling off period now. Finally, Ryan gives us an update on El Salvador and the adoption of Bitcoin as a legal currency and really how Bitcoin is being used in everyday society. The next topic we cover for roughly 10 to 15 minutes is about the process of accepting digital assets as a form of payment. This may be from vendors and customers, but we wanted to take a dive into what that looks and feels like for new users, since we here at Withum are seeing more and more companies dip their toes into this space, but they're unclear where to start. So part two of that conversation, right, so getting familiar with digital assets and how to accept it, is really to understand the wallet types and give a high-level pros and cons to new users understanding the different options that are available. Ryan and I have really given countless presentations, and we speak pretty frequently together on this topic. It's always a pleasure talking crypto with Ryan, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I do want to point out again that this recording is from September 2022, so it does not take into account the current situation related to FTX and any other financial institutions that may be affected by the current market. And welcome to today's segment with myself, Mark Eckerly, and Ryan Babiak. This panel is Blockchain Crypto Tokens Oh My, Practical Applications for Your Business and What You Need to Know. And what that really means is a bunch of different topics. We have a full agenda that we're going to dive into. But I'll kick it off first with a little background on myself. I am a senior manager here at Withum in our technology and emerging growth practice. I'm also the firm's team leader of our digital asset and blockchain technology group. You could also call that like our Web3 group, as that's kind of been the buzzword for 2022 now. But I work primarily on the audit and accounting side. So this is a good panel for Ryan and myself to kind of break things up as he focuses on the tax side. But what that really means here at Withum is we work with a variety of companies, not with just in our technology group, but also in our financial services practice with hedge funds and investment companies, also in our not-for-profit and our manufacturing group. So crypto is really kind of industry agnostic, where it touches a lot of different companies, a lot of different verticals, which definitely keeps it interesting. But with that, I mean, I'll kick it over to Ryan and talks about how a little bit of background on yourself and how we kind of work with companies as well as individuals.
Thanks, Mark. You took the words from me by saying it keeps it interesting, because how many calls do you and I have on a weekly basis, and every company is doing something different in this space, right? So it's really not limited to technology at all. So everyone, I'm Ryan Babiak. I am a tax partner at Withum, also part of our technology and emerging growth practice. Work in a number of different sectors as part of our group, but I work with Mark pretty frequently with our clients in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, and that really runs from business enterprises to individuals that have personal investment tax planning questions as well.
Awesome. So our agenda is it kind of bounces around a little bit here. We're gonna kick things off kind of with a recap of 2022. That covers the regulatory side, the audit side, the accounting, taxes, just give a general update, as well as kind of like a state of the economy, right? Let's talk about what's happened, what's transpired. I know everyone's focusing on the price, which is down obviously right now at the market in the red. So we'll kind of talk about how we got there, because the last 2 years have been pretty positive for the industry, right? I know all during the pandemic, investments, everything was in the green, it looked good. Crypto right along with that. So talk about how we kind of ended up there today. And then we'll jump into, I think, the meat and potatoes of today's presentation and the practical applications of how it impacts companies like that we work with on an everyday basis, and accepting it, storing it, and how it's almost used as a form of currency, right? I know the current accounting guidance doesn't really fall within the currency language, but we work with a lot of companies that use it as a form of payment, right? It's paying vendors, paying employees. So what does that look and feel like? And how do you properly store that with the right controls in place? And we're going to dive into some different wallet structures. So we'll cover all of that. And then we'll just talk about, kind of towards the end, we'll put a little bow on it with just some use cases and practical uses of crypto and the utility and almost the value proposition, right? So kind of discussing the whole ICO boom and how we ended up today. And there were so many different tokens, and we'll just kind of dive into, well, why are there so many different tokens, and do they all have special uses? So with that, before we jump in, obviously anyone post your questions in the forum. We're going to answer them throughout the presentation. So definitely keep that rolling, and please be on the lookout for, I think it's your polling letters. Is that right, Ryan? Not numbers, polling letters that'll pop up throughout.
Yeah, there should be a letter to pop up that I believe you can grab and almost bank for later to submit after the presentation.
Perfect. So make sure everyone gets their CPE credit for today's presentation. I want to kick it off. As you could probably tell, I'm pretty passionate about this space. So I do want to say that any opinions are mine and not Withum's. So this is not investment advice, because I don't want you to think I'm steering anyone to go and invest in crypto. I feel like
despite your best efforts,
I feel like I have a tendency to do that. So, but now I'll start off with a good regulatory update. I think that's important, right? Kind of what's the state of affairs and what's it look like, especially from Washington's the point of view, right? I know early in the year, I believe it was in March or maybe early April, where President Biden issued his executive order. What did that really mean, right? I think that was a good starting point for the year, where there wasn't much to come out of it. It was just giving the public the perception that government and Washington, they are looking at crypto. They are trying to find the best way to regulate this new asset class. Nothing substantial really came out of it. It was just that President Biden really just said he's calling for the government to explore the risks and benefits of crypto so that we can issue some guidance in the future, right? Some regulatory clarity. And the overarching goal of that, which is different from, I would say, where we were this time a year ago, right? We were sitting here giving a presentation at last year's Tech Summit. And we definitely have a little bit more regulatory clarity, but I wouldn't say we're anything there with what's been issued or finalized. Still, everything's still up in the air. But the overarching goal is, and the sentiment is that innovation, the goal from Washington and the United States is to keep innovation here rather than push it overseas and outside the country. I think it's working together with our policymakers and our regulatory bodies so that we can basically get the rules right. We don't want Washington to come out and sit around and wait for them to come out with regulatory guidance that we don't necessarily agree with, that companies, it doesn't really help them in the long run. So it's kind of educating them. Right, Ryan, how long have we been saying that? Education is key. I think that's been
a long time. And a lot of the conversations around building out the infrastructure around this, right, to where we get to a point where we're not just talking about speculative investments, but we're talking about actual practical use of blockchain technology, of cryptocurrency. So I'm optimistic we'll get there, but I'm less optimistic that it'll happen quickly.
Exactly.
As we've seen, it hasn't, right? Like you said, we've been talking about it for a couple of years, and we're still going down the path and getting the building blocks together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to take time. I would think. I mean, the time horizon, it's got to be somewhere in like the 3 to 5 year range, just because innovation is not going to stop. Right, the industry is not waiting around for regulation. It's going to keep moving forward. Every year, it seems like there's something new. Right, we had the NFT boom, we have DeFi, we had stable coins a couple years ago. So it's constantly evolving, and I mean, it's just the government's going to have to play catch up at some point. So I think it's just making sure that they get it right. That's the key. And it's funny because Gary Gensler actually came out, and I think this was last week or a couple weeks ago, and talked about crypto as a whole, that it's the wild, wild west, right? And that's a term that's been thrown around for crypto probably since the beginning, right? Because it is such a new asset class.
Almost that we need a new one. I'm kind of tired of using it and hearing it.
Exactly. But it's funny because people within industry, while the price volatility makes it feel that way, that it's the wild, wild west, because you never know where the market's going, people within industry, we want that regulation. We want that clarity. We want to follow the rules, especially us being advisors to a lot of the clients we work with. We want to make sure we're doing things by the book. So we're not really trying to be working in the wild, wild west, working in this new asset class that has no rules. We want to follow something. And again, it all comes back to just making sure that we get it right.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised, but I'm happy to hear when we get on these calls with potential clients, people that need our help, have a lot of questions, that's one of the first things they say. And from my perspective on tax, it's how do we legitimately lower my tax bill? I don't know what to do. How do I do this? It's not trying to hide assets. It's not trying to be a bad actor. It's people trying to do the right thing and stay above board, at least in our experience. Now, those people are out there, I'm sure. That's why a lot of this infrastructure is taking a long time to build. The regulatory side of this is taking a long time to get right. But you and I know, haven't seen too much of that. The people that are trying to circumvent the rules or figure out ways to kind of create their own, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, we use everything by analogy. That's how it was early on, right? I think the IRS was one of the first bodies to really issue some guidance, some clarity as to how to follow and implement this new asset class. But if you think about it, really from a regulatory stance, right? When we talk to a lot of companies, one of our first questions, especially if they have their own native token, is how are you applying the Howey test, right? And that was something that came out in 1946. We're 80 years later, we're still applying something that probably doesn't necessarily apply to this new and emerging technology, because that's really what it is, right? It's a technology. Everything is very I'll say intangible, if you will, right? There's nothing really physical about this asset class. So it's really just trying to build something and come out with some guidance that fits. We're really putting a square peg in a round hole with this. It's just trying to figure out what fits and makes sense. And then finally, I mean, just jumping really quickly to a quick audit update. I mean, this is probably very similar to what was issued last year because there's really not much of an update. We have our AICPA guidance, which is I wouldn't say it's non-authoritative. Came out in December of 2019, I believe, and it's been updated, I think, 3 or 4 times since then, periodically. As just like I said, there's been new and new instances, NFTs, DeFi, stable coins. So just trying to keep up with that. The most recent guidance, which was important, was I think it came out in January of this year. There was some disclosures, almost like an FAQ, around crypto lending. So that helped provide some clarity around how to account for a lot of these investment instruments, these derivative instruments, things like that, because we're seeing a lot more companies getting into that kind of alternative business, right? Trying to find a way to get some of that passive income, and whether that's done with native crypto, whether that's done with Bitcoin or ETH, or it's done with a stable coin, right? And I think that's going to parlay nicely into one of our topics that I'm going to bounce to shortly, and a lot of those companies that were kind of over leveraged, that were giving out some of those interest rates, about 7, 8, 9%. But before I jump into that, let's jump into some tax things. Give us a quick update on what that looks like, where we are today, and how things are coming along for 2022.
Sure. Yeah, and I know you could probably do an hour just on audit and accounting rules, and I can do an hour on tax. We've done it before. For a number of years, I was saying the same things about the tax rules around this. Here they are. There was a notice that the IRS came out in 2014. The rules haven't been fleshed out since then, despite the community asking for them, right? The AICPA asked the IRS to provide some guidelines on a number of questions. And finally, in late 2019, there was a revenue ruling issued around how hard forks and airdrops, when they're taxable, are they taxable events? They are typically. But the IRS also did add, I believe it's 46 frequently asked questions around just various tax crypto like issues that come up, things like how to value coins, right? Can you specifically identify what you're selling? What are the methods that are available? If you provide services and get paid in crypto, how is that taxed? There's plenty of them. You could just Google IRS FAQs on crypto or virtual currency. You'll get to the landing page on the website. And it's pretty helpful, but It's important to know these are not authoritative. It's not authoritative guidance. This is just helpful for people to figure out what to do with their own taxes, but they don't carry any statutory authority. So, just as a general rule of thumb, all settlements of crypto are typically a taxable event, and that could include coin-to-coin transactions. There are no like-kind exchanges when it comes to cryptocurrency. That went out the window at the beginning of 2018 as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There was some gray area around this where, people in the community, investors, they were trying to do this in 2017 and prior, and the rules weren't clear. So it was, our position on it was, since it's a risky position, there are, you can disclose that to the IRS and mitigate penalties, but at the same time, you're kind of pointing right at your front door for them to come and ask you questions about how you accounted for something. So there's still some ambiguity around crypto in general. One of the few areas that's left to try to take advantage of a I guess we'll call it a loophole the IRS hasn't really addressed yet is if anybody's familiar with the wash sale rules, right? So the market's down right now. People may be holding quite a bit in their portfolio that it has an unrealized loss attached to it, right? They bought Bitcoin at its high, and maybe they're still holding it when we're at what, Mark, 19,000 and change as of today. I haven't checked it as of today, right? So yeah. So what the wash sale rules can do is you can sell something at a loss, and then it's a paper loss because you can replace it, either immediately before or after you unload that higher basis, coin or token. And that's because wash sale rules cover securities, and virtual currency is specifically identified as property, not a security. So that rule is still there. The Congress was ready to remedy the loophole in the tax code, but it was ultimately cut from our recent Inflation Reduction Act of this year. So what's actually coming out right now, and I'll cover this quickly, but it's important to know, is that myself and people like tax professionals, the biggest struggle we have is record keeping and to be able to help people. It's tough for us to provide guidance and proper compliance if we don't have the right records to do it. And that's not always the fault of an investor, right? Of somebody that's dabbling in even speculatively in crypto. So what had come out of last year's infrastructure bill is that the IRS is going to, over time, start to enforce that crypto exchanges are considered brokers, and financial institutions will have to do this too, where there will be required 1099 reporting, which sounds great to me because it means some of my questions get eliminated. I get to look at a 1099. We can do some planning. I can see what's there. I know what you're holding, what your basis is, when you bought it, when you sold it. The challenge is just the infrastructure is nowhere near where it needs to be to do this successfully. So the plan was to roll this out in 2023. It's now been deferred until 2024. Let's see if that changes. With that, eventually will also come a new Form 1099. There's supposed to be a 1099 DA for digital assets. It hasn't been released yet, but we'll see what happens and what that looks like. And then finally, the recent Inflation Reduction Act, right? There's $80 billion going to the IRS over the next 10 years. The majority of it's going to go to enforcement and operation support. And a significant component of that is going to include digital asset monitoring and compliance activities, which, hopefully it doesn't scare people who have been kind of unsure what they're doing with their taxes. But I can assure you the half dozen calls we have on a weekly basis, I think we're going to double that in no time once these dates are a little bit, are drawn in the sand here. So, that's my update on the tax side. I mean, as always, use the forum, ask some questions. Happy to answer any specific ones that you have.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things that really came out in the last probably 2 years, I think we're in our second year, was right at the top of Form 1040, right? They ask any transactions in virtual currencies, right? Buying, selling. Not that some of those transactions will cause a taxable event, right? Like buying with cash doesn't cause a taxable event, but they're just trying to have everyone report their holdings to make sure it's accurate. So that way, on a going forward basis, everything's being accounted for properly. But the one thing that was really funny was, what was it, a couple years ago when they tried to issue the 1099K, Was that? So it's good to hear that they're trying to get some clarity there.
Yeah, it was just, it would, you'd have exchanges that would issue this 1099-K thinking they'd be helpful, and it would just disclose the gross value of all transactions, no basis information whatsoever. So it just looked like you had all this income when it's, there's a very different reality from what that form would say. And people were getting notices to try to support what their gains and losses were. So it's, in an attempt to try to do the right thing by their customers, a lot of these exchanges were creating some more headaches than intended.
And it would just show a very small piece of the puzzle, right? Because you can have 15 different wallets across 15 different exchanges, kind of all over the place. And if you're just getting one 1099-K from one exchange, that doesn't show nearly enough of the picture. Like you said, it all comes back to that record keeping piece. But one question I want to kick over to you, because I think it's important for people to know, for anyone that's getting new into the space, is you mentioned selling crypto to crypto, right? That caused a taxable event. What if I just transfer from one wallet to another, or one exchange to another, and it stays in the same native token? Is that a taxable event?
And no, that's okay. The challenge there is just the proof, right? And so a lot of people have taken it upon themselves to use many tools that are out there to track your holdings, right? Coin Tracker, Coinly, a couple that come to mind, where you just have to make sure you're diligent to be able to go in and label activity that's happening in your wallets, right? So that it is marked as this was just a transfer from one to the other, no different than me moving money between a couple of different checking accounts.
Yep. And just to kind of summarize this update here, I didn't really touch on it too much in my ANA update, but we are still waiting on official authoritative guidance from the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So right now we are using what the AICPA has issued, and we may fall somewhere in line there, but still nothing authoritative from FASB. So we are still on the lookout there, and I know they are working on it. We are plugged into their network. We work closely with FASB along with other accounting firms. So it is definitely on their agenda. It's definitely on the horizon. When, I don't know, but it's in process. So we do have a couple areas we just want to give a brief update on, kind of summarizing 2022 now, right? So that's our tax ANA, our regulatory update. So what got us to where we are today for 2022, right? I think there's about 4 or 5 different areas we're going to quickly touch on. One is what just happened, right? The ETH merge, ETH 2.0. Kind of got a couple different names here. What does that mean, and how does that impact anyone holding ETH or transacting in it, right? So right now, what does it mean for you or I, anyone transacting, holding it? There is really no action. It was the transition, the merge from Ethereum network going from a proof of work, POW mining system, to a proof of stake network. So what does that mean, right? Proof of stake is kind of getting away from everyone's thought process of mining, right? Computers working in a basement, solving complex math equations or formulas, using all this energy. I know everyone's got that negative connotation that Bitcoin's sucking up all this energy and it's bad for the environment. So that's where proof of stake comes in, and it really changes the protocol, the mining aspect of it, right? So now transactions are validated by validators who are basically assigned at random when a transaction happens to confirm the accuracy of a transaction, right? Now, how do you become a validator? So you have to own that token. You have to own ETH, and you stake it. You lock it up. Each protocol, because there are a couple other proof of stake networks out there, have different time horizons for what that lockup period is. But you lock up your tokens and you become a validator within the network, and you are the incentive there, right? To do that, to lock up your tokens, is by confirming transactions and confirming the accuracy, you are rewarded with new tokens. So it's kind of like, think of it like almost like interest, right? You're locking up your funds and you're earning passive interest. And that's also how new tokens are introduced into the ecosystem through that process. Now, what happens if you are, I'll say, a bad actor, right? And you have your token staked and you're not properly confirming accurate information, you're not confirming transactions. Well, that's the risk of locking up your tokens, right? You can lose your staked assets. So they can be taken from you by basically being a bad actor. So that's kind of the incentive there to bring everyone together and work all on the same playing field. But again, that's not something that if you're transacting in ETH, you'll really feel by doing that one-to-one transaction from me to you. Ryan, if I were to send you some ETH, that wouldn't be something that's found on the surface, right? It's anyone that's kind of working on the protocol itself. The fees, the gas fees, the transaction speed, all of that is the same. No real change there. The biggest concern from the industry is that this proof of stake network almost feels like it's going to have some type of concentration, right? Because if you think of proof of work, there's the hashing power, the network power, how much mining activity do I have to be plugged into the network? Is there that 51% debate? Do I own 51% of the mining power of the network? With proof of stake, it's similar in that touch and feel, where if I have enough assets staked, right? If I'm a large holder of ETH, one of the original founders or something to that effect, where I'm staking my entire worth there, it could be a large portion of the total circulating supply. And the real issue there is you're going to see a lot of exchanges, the Coinbase, the Binances, the Krakens, where they're going to have staking pools. So that's where you or I, we're not one of the large players. We throw our assets into a staking pool. We have more incentive to get the rewards because we're part of a larger number, rather than just winging it and having myself with my small pool of ETH, kind of hoping, my fingers crossed, that I get the random choice to be a validator. Those staking pools, if you kind of aggregate 2, 3, 4 of them, that's going to be a large portion of the entire network, if you think about it, right? Because there's so many users plugged into those exchanges, it becomes very large with those staking pools. So that's something to definitely monitor and be on the lookout for, because the whole ethos of crypto, right, is the decentralization aspect of it. So that's kind of the one risk when it comes to the proof of stake network. But the real impressive thing before I transition is this happened right around September 15th, and there was no hiccup at all in transactions, right? It happened kind of overnight here on the East Coast time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It was seamless. Now, there's been updates throughout, but this was the biggest by far update made to the Ethereum network, and it was pretty much a seamless transition, which was very impressive. So I gotta give to that, and I think that helps talk about the Ethereum network parlays nicely into what do we want to talk about next, right? The NFT update. Where do we stand? I know that was all the hype for the last couple of years. So
yeah, good transition, Mark. So we're talking about Ethereum and the merge, and Ethereum's think of it as the lifeblood of NFTs, right? So it's a term that we all know now for just being in mainstream media, but I'm not sure everybody knows exactly what it means, and the many use cases it can have, right? So NFT, digital assets, they're a method of authentication for buyers of unique items. It can be music, it can be art, it can be a video, and they're proving aspects like, the holder's ownership. It's unique to you. It's one of its kind. It's yours, right? So we've also seen companies using NFTs as a gateway, maybe, or an incentive to attract long-term customers for products and services. And Mark, you were just telling me the other day that you were at was it a trade show or a conference where you went to, if you wanted to buy a hat, explain that to me.
Yeah, there was a conference back in June. It was NFT NYC, and in the showroom they had there was one of the, I don't remember the name of the company, but they were giving away hats, and it wasn't a free table where you just go up and take merch like you think, or swag. The guy, you basically had to buy the NFT, and embedded in the brim was your ownership or your digital representation that you bought it. And there was like a 1-for-1. Each one kind of had a logo, almost like when you think of cards, right? There could be a collection. So I thought that was pretty neat. It was a good use case of really showing NFTs right at the conference.
Yeah, I think it's so there's practical real world cases where NFTs come into play, and then there's the cool things like that, right? It's also a way for a company to maybe get customer engagement, right? To kind of get you like into their no different than hey, 15% off your first purchase, something like that, right? To get you into the business. So as a consumer, I split NFTs into 2 categories, right? Personal collection, investment, and like I said, practical real world use cases. Practically anything can be tokenized or digitized today. There's a number of companies out there already moving physical items into NFTs, like the hats like we just talked about. I think maybe one of the biggest and most compelling use cases to emerge so far is around real estate and property. right? You ever bought a place before? You know how arduous and time consuming the process is, right? Paperwork upon paperwork upon paperwork, and maybe some antiquated systems. And there's businesses out there that are trying to improve it through technology, but NFTs are being touted as a way of maybe modernizing how things are done, like ownership being just recorded on the blockchain can speed up the closing process. Maybe it reduces disputes or property claims, help clamp down on fraud too. It opens up the door to house purchasing being made with crypto instead of fiat, right? US dollars.
I
We've seen
have a
them.
perfect,
Go
I have a
ahead. Yeah, go
perfect
ahead.
use case there. It's funny. I don't want to cut you off, but
Go
I
ahead.
bought my house over 2 years ago, and I mean, it was my first time buying a house, but going through the process, our deed wasn't registered with the town for about 3 months post closing. And it really opened my eyes to that this could be digitized, obviously, with a governmental body, the municipalities, everything's in paperwork. So it's a little bit more old school than even where we are today, not even thinking like bringing the blockchain component into it. But it really helped open my eyes that this could be automated. It could be like my deed could be transferred on the blockchain to me same day.
Yeah.
Like that's how I would think
Yeah.
it could be at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen, but we could get there at some point. Because I know real estate, like you mentioned, it's a great use case to help show how blockchain technology and cryptocurrency as well can help provide some use case to the everyday person.
It's like with everything else we talk about. I mean, the potential is amazing. It's the adoption and it's
Yeah.
the infrastructure that gets the trust of the consumer, right? Or anybody to be able to use this and make it just like a normal everyday part of our lives. So yeah, great use cases out there. I think that can improve business, can improve the way that we do things in our lives. But right now, I think a lot of it, the UC NFTs are in digitizing products. They're trying to make it just another avenue for collectibles and ownership and things that are interesting, unique to you. You're like, hey, I have this. I'm the only one that has the whether it be like the best example I use for sports, because I come back to that. I think it's a great use case for sports. It's just, hey, maybe I'm the only one that has the NFT of like Michael Jordan's like foul line dunk in the slam dunk contest in the late 80s, right? That'd be pretty cool to say that you have that. God knows what that would cost or what it does cost, but that's beside the point, right? So big companies are getting into this market, right? And Nike is dominating the rankings when it comes to mainstream brands generating revenue from NFTs. They've doing a little research, since they've launched any NFT programs, looks like they brought in close to about $185 million in revenue, just diving headfirst into the world of digital sneakers. I mean, look at any of the professional athletes and remember MTV Cribs, right? You get the view inside their house and there's 300 pairs of shoes. Well, maybe someone's got 300 pairs of digital shoes now, right?
They're going to have those digital shoes living in their closet in the metaverse.
yeah, right. Hey, it could be a new wave for the fashion industry, right? The innovation isn't stop there, but there's other companies that are getting in that space too. Dolce & Gabbana is one, Adidas, Tiffany's another one. Digital products can be used in gaming, mobile applications. They've been in these applications for a while, but the monetization model I think is changing a bit, right? I mean, take like Bitmoji. We all have an avatar, maybe in the Bitmoji. You send a message to a friend, and everybody thinks they look better than they probably do. But now you can go in there, and you're not just grabbing a white T-shirt and a pair of jeans. If you're a guy, you can go in there, and maybe I got a pair of Jordans or a Carhartt jacket or an Adidas shirt or something like that, right? I've even been reading that Ticketmaster is starting to dabble into NFTs. To get tickets that serve as almost a commemoration of a concert or an event you went to, which is pretty cool. And that goes into the last thing I want to touch on, which is collectibles and things that are rare. There's thousands of NFTs getting minted every day. There's so many consumers actively like jockeying to find the most rare and valuable pieces that they have. As the supply grows, finding rare pieces becomes more challenging. Things get more expensive too as demand grows. I've seen people, and I don't know if you know anybody that's starting to do this, but fractional ownership into an NFT, right? Almost like a share in a business. I mean, that's another way to get in there. If something is so expensive that you can't afford it.
A good way of that. I see
yeah.
that is it's fractional ownership, but it's part of a collection, right? And I see it a lot. If you think of anyone that is gambling in DraftKings, right? They have the NFT marketplace, and they have 100 of the same card. So it's not fractional per se, but it's like one of 100 almost.
Okay.
Similar to like trading cards,
Well,
but it's
like trading
all
cards,
that
right?
whole
When they have,
ecosystem is all digital. So it's not like you're going to have that physical card floating around. It's all just
you're not
in
going to
the.
scratch it and then ruin the value, right?
Mhm.
It maintains its perfection, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just gonna say OpenSea, generally considered one of the leading NFT marketplaces. They just announced the implementation of something called Open Rarity, which would be a protocol that provides like verifiable rarity calculations for NFTs within its platform. Almost like how you would go back to trading cards. You used to take it to a trade show or like the local card shop, and they would evaluate it based on the condition that it's in, similar to that
You
in a
get
sense, right?
Yeah, kids now they'll like they send their cards away to get graded, and they come back
Yeah,
with a
yeah.
grade on them. But it's a great point because one of the toughest parts about NFTs is the valuation factor, right? Like if I own a Bored Ape, how do I know what makes my Bored Ape so special and unique that it's not the high end cost? Because there's a big range between the cost of what the top 10 Bored Apes cost versus the lower tier, the floor,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
what are those distinguishing factors, and knowing, almost coming from an outsider's view, right? Like why is one worth more than the other just because it has a gold chain? What does that really do, right?
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's a good piece because that's definitely needed in the marketplace right now, is understanding the valuation of different NFTs that are part of a bigger collection, right? The one
yeah,
I get, but it's whatever someone would buy for it, but it's part of a collection. What makes this one so special compared to the others that are kind of similar like in likeness?
yeah. You're right. I wonder, are we going to get to a point where we have a new like an NFT version of Pawn Stars? Someone's going to bring their NFT to some
That shit was
best
awesome.
best I can give you is this, right? Or somebody thinks they've got the a Wyatt Earp gun, and it turns out they just got it at any like five and dime or like local variety store or something, right? So just last touch on this too. You know, NFTs they seem to be the more like wide consumer, like more easily adopted to consumers, and that's across the world. I saw a report that Chainalysis came out with that highlighted NFTs are the largest driver in crypto adoption, and it was Central and Southern Asia, and then like the Oceanic region, right? So apparently 58% of web traffic for crypto services is NFT related. So the interest is there. It's a great on ramp to get into this community. And then on a personal level, I like all these unique releases, right? You may not be able to see it in the background, but I got a bunch of these silly Funko Pops I keep in my office, right? They just announced they're teaming up with Warner Brothers. They're going to do a DC Comics NFT release, right? So the inner nerd in me is like, this is pretty cool. Even if I, I'm not getting into the space maybe to invest and make money. Maybe it's just because this is just something different for me to get involved in and start to become a collector of something. So it's certainly here to stay, and I'm interested and really excited to see where it's going to go.
Yeah, and it's actually, NFTs have been around for some time. I know it really came into
Yeah.
popularity over the last probably 2 to 3 years or so. But the big issue when I think I first kind of came to somewhat mainstream within the crypto community was like during the ICO craze in like 2016, 2017,
Yeah.
because there was this thing called crypto kitties where the Ethereum network was so bogged down with everyone transacting with crypto kitties and kind of moving their, I don't know, accessories or whatever you may have on that blockchain. So I think
Mhm.
it all kind of parlays nicely into, it's a lot of these are built on the Ethereum network, some are on Solana or other chains,
Sure.
but it's all about helping to scale the network as a whole, right? And trying to figure out how are transaction fees less, because that's the best way to get adoption, right? What are the available softwares out there that I can use that are user friendly? Like I know I can digitize or tokenize things, and I kind of
Mhm.
theoretically get that concept. What does that look and feel like to the average consumer? Because that's the only way you're going to really grow this space. And if I'm paying $150 just to execute a transaction without even thinking about the cost of what
Yeah, you're going
the
to
good,
maybe scare some people away who aren't
exactly,
familiar with it or don't trust it yet.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I know that was one of
I,
the original
I
use
don't see
cases
too many
for it. Yeah.
people in like the novice space. You're either involved in it or you're very involved in it or you're not touching it.
Yeah.
I just over time, as the trust is built out, then you'd think more people would come on board. So we'll see. Um, Hey, something I wanted to bring up, right? We're about a year into El Salvador officially adopting Bitcoin as its national currency, right? So they decoupled themselves from the US dollar. Right, BTC is legal tender. They're encouraging the adoption of BTC, of Bitcoin, nationwide. Why'd they do it? Some say it was to hedge inflation risk of the US dollar. Hey, good foresight there, right? Inflation's out of control. But others say it was a show of an authoritarian, I can't say this word, Mark, authoritarian government led by their president, Nayib Bukele. So the adoption challenges they've had, right? So there's logistical and technical glitches all over the place. I mean, who didn't see this coming? There are reports of identity theft. The infrastructure around widespread BTC just isn't there. So they've had some challenges, and they've brought in some developers to come in and, Alpha Point, I believe, is the one they brought in to improve the infrastructure, right? They've been doing crypto projects like this, not national currency adoption, but just widespread BTC adoption projects in about 35 countries so far. So it's going in the right direction. Some of the things that worked against it, right? Foresight on the inflation. Hey, great, but guess what? Bitcoin itself isn't doing so well right now. So the market drop, it hurt the value of the currency. It's creating challenges for the country's financial system. Some have calculated there's about $425 million in commitments that the government's going to struggle to recoup, especially, they've also got a large amount of bonds coming due in the next couple of years. So, we're going to have to, keep our eye on that. But there's also some good that come out of it, right? There's increased interest in the country. Tourism, just, it's not maybe directly related, but it is nice to see, I'm sure, El Salvador, put themselves on the map, so to speak, right? In a good use case, there's reduced cost for people that are native to El Salvador working abroad and remitting funds back to family members, right? This is a very popular thing for people who immigrate to another country, and those fees are averaging about half of what it would typically cost to wire cash through traditional means. So I like the sound of that. I think that's a good outcome, and maybe there's a way to scale that and have other countries see that, hey, this is something that we could benefit from, even if it's not a national adoption. Using crypto as a way to facilitate money, back home for people that typically would not know how to use the technology this way, would be great. And then they've got experience. At some point, El Salvador is not going to be the only one to go down this path. And those people could stand to benefit, and the government could stand to benefit because they'll have experience and the challenges of rolling out the program in their own country. So, I mean, it's kind of let's wait and see right now. Just on the face of it, the reports are there's challenges, but who didn't think that was going to happen, right?
Yeah, that's obviously inevitable, and I don't want to call them like the guinea pig, right? But I think, like you said, more and more countries we're going to get there where maybe it's not labeled as a currency, but it is a means of payment to an extent, right? And obviously you talked about cross-border payments. That's probably one of the best use cases of cryptocurrencies as a whole. Yeah. But the one question that we get all the time, right, is if I have cryptocurrencies, who's investing in it, right? Because you're not going to buy coffee with it. Right, it's an investment. That's the way everyone looks at it right now because it's so volatile. I don't want to go and buy a cup of coffee today where that Bitcoin could go through the roof tomorrow. So I think seeing that use case from what El Salvador is doing, right, because all the corporations there, Starbucks, McDonald's, anywhere you want to go buy food, drinks, goods, they're all accepting Bitcoin now. So seeing that you can go do that, right? Because we feel that question all the time. I'm not going to buy a cup of coffee here in the United States with my Bitcoin. Now, in certain cities, you can because there's certain companies that offer that means of exchange. But seeing that it's happening around the world is a big kind of eye opener to a lot of people that it can be done, and I think it will be done on a larger scale at some point.
Well, so let's go through an example, right? I mean, many people that are partaking today, right, are business folks, and they have a customer that comes in and says, I want to pay in Bitcoin. Well, what do they do? How do they get started? How is this not a barrier for them to work with that person or that company?
No, and it's a great point because I think it really helps. It's a big, important question with a lot of companies we work with because, like as we mentioned, crypto is going to become a more commonplace means of exchange at some point, maybe not tomorrow, but I think sooner rather than later. So I think it's important because we've been fielding that question a lot over the last 12 months from companies that say, hey, we don't we're not in the business of investing in crypto. We're not in the business of holding it, but we have customers coming to us that just want to pay in it because maybe their customers, maybe a crypto native company, or they had it in some form or what have you. So how do you go about doing that, right? Like, how does that transaction get executed? Because you don't want to say, no, we don't accept it. You have to pay us in this, and it kind of opens up a couple of additional doors. So I'm proud to say that here at Withum, we've been accepting crypto as a form of payment from our customers for a little over 3 years now, I believe. And it's a variety of different digital assets, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum. There's a couple other, especially a lot of the stable coins as well, right? So companies that we're seeing that more and more have stable coins as a means of payment because it takes away that volatility piece, right?
Exactly.
So you're not really
I think that's what people are worried about, right? Is so how do I guess before we get into how they get this set up though, I mean, how do they have to take on that risk? Like, so what would an option, what's our option with them, right? To lose the risk of volatility. How do we get past that and just make this about convenience rather than speculation for Withum or another business to make money on receiving digital assets from a customer?
Exactly, right? Like Withum's not in the business of holding Bitcoin on our balance sheet, right? But we're in the business of accepting it from our company, from our clients, to help make their job and their life easier. So we don't take that risk of volatility, right? We accept it, and we have a service provider who helps us in the back end liquidate it same day, right? So when I invoice a customer and I say, hey, you owe us $50,000 or whatever the invoice terms are, whether your payment terms are 30, 60, 90 days, and whenever they ultimately pay you, because obviously we do have some customers that pay us longer than that.
Yeah, sure.
Not
changes,
ideal, but whatever the length of payment is, you still want to get your $50,000 at the end of the day in US dollars. So the terms in the invoice on it state $50,000 USD or whatever your currency is, and that could be 1 Bitcoin today, that could be 1.5 Bitcoins tomorrow. So the onus is on the customer to really kind of pay you when they think the market's right, I'll say, but they should pay you, and you're not taking the game of the volatility on, right? So you're getting your $50,000, and invoicing is pretty simple, right? There are service providers out there that execute that all for you. If you don't want to have crypto on your books, they can liquidate it for you. You can even liquidate it.
And you're never taking ownership, or it's, is it instantaneous? Do I ever actually take ownership? Does it even, would it even matter if the question comes up because it's, hey, I liquidated already. It is truly there for a business, maybe if that's how they view it, to use it as a convenience, right? I'm thinking of it in terms of not being so different than working with businesses in other countries and other currency denominations, right? My contract with you is in US dollars. So however many euros or pounds or whatever, wherever we are, I'm still getting paid the same.
It's very similar. It's very similar to your point earlier about what does it look like to settle with stable coins, right? So, and with that term, I'm talking about tokens out there pegged 1-to-1 to the US dollar, right? So the USDC, USDP, BUSD, those are all stable coins pegged 1-to-1 to the US dollar. So they don't have the volatility of a Bitcoin or an Ether, where you're really kind of playing the market. You hold that as an asset on your balance sheet. Yes, it's separate from cash. It kind of falls into that cash equivalent category, but it gives you that touch and feel of working with blockchain technology, right? And seeing what it looks like to settle a transaction on those payment rails. The transaction fees are obviously significantly less if you're doing especially cross-border payments or sending wires, things like that. So that can help open your eyes to, hey, this technology really does open some additional doors, especially if we're trying, as a company, trying to scale, right? If we're going to have global customers, we want to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for everyone involved. And I think that is one way that cryptocurrency and blockchain technology kind of comes into play here, right? Because you mentioned foreign currencies, right? I have to work with my financial institution. Do they accept the British pound? And will they give me US dollars? Is it a 3-day lag for that settlement to actually happen? So there's a bunch of different nuances there, but I think the short and sweet of it is understanding the different type of infrastructure from a wallet standpoint, right? Your wallet is think of it like your bank account. That's where you send and receive your digital assets. understanding the different infrastructures there will help open the door to how you want to transact in digital assets, right? If you're not in the game of holding it, then there's service providers that can help you. You don't really even need to set up a wallet. But if you maybe say you want to accept it, or if you just want to accept stable coins, so you don't even have the volatility, it's very important to understand the risks and benefits of the different type of wallet structures in there, which I think helps parlay nicely into one of our next points is kind of what are the different wallet types out there, right? So there's hot wallets, there's exchange wallets, there's desktop, custodial. What do all those terms mean, right? Those are all probably, if you think about it, active wallets that are online, right? So the most, I would say, in my opinion, the most secure type of wallet infrastructure is what's known as cold storage or vault, sitting in like a vault. So there are third parties that will offer that, where it's basically holding your tokens offline. So it takes a day or two to retrieve those. Or you can have a physical hardware wallet that's, think of like a USB, right? Or a physical device that you have. I have a Ledger wallet, but there's other devices. There's a Trezor, a device called SafePal, Keystone. So there's a couple of different brands in the marketplace. Obviously, as the market's become more mature, there's going to be competitors.
Absolutely.
But I think the important thing to note is that it's the most secure. It's the most, I would say, easy to use because it's a physical device. And I think when you think of cash, it's physical.
We're kind of used to the how many devices are we used to, right? And they only tend to get smaller and smaller. So you could have, God knows how much worth sitting on a device this big, right? So yeah, I don't think that would be a foreign concept to any of us. Maybe what do you say to people who get worried about losing a physical device?
That's the biggest thing, especially with companies you work with, right? As an auditor, I put my auditor hat on, right? Understanding the controls and what's the process around there, who has access to that device is the most important thing, right? Because we want to make sure that controls are in place across all facets of a company, right? So when we do our cash walkthroughs or when understanding a company's disbursements policy, right? Is the person initiating a transaction the same one approving it? Or is there two different figureheads there that have to do that to help kind of have your checks and balances in place? When you have a physical device in cold storage, like a hardware wallet, those controls are kind of out the door a little bit because there's one device, you own the private key, I put my password in, and I kind of have access. One way to mitigate that is if I have the physical device, but I don't know how to access it. If I don't have the code to get into it, kind of need two people.
In my head, I'm picturing like a James Bond movie where we both got to turn the key to send the homing missile to some
at the same time from so that's one of the areas there, especially from an audit perspective, just understanding the controls. Because if a company is trying to get into this new area of asset class, right? You want to make sure you have the controls in place and the infrastructure before you just go on board, go full in and say, here we are, we have crypto on our books and here it is. So when you have a type of wallet that's online, right, there's different features you can have. You can have an exchange wallet, which is basically just a username and password, similar to the way you would access your banking.
All very used to, right?
Yep. So that's very quick, user-friendly to set up. It's a one-man show, kind of, if you will, or a one-person show, I should say, where you can log on, you can accept it. You have different opportunities to kind of different offerings of digital assets, right? So exchanges typically have a host of digital assets. You can buy, sell, trade, send, receive, but they don't really have the infrastructure there from a control standpoint. Again, putting my auditor hat on.
It's the trust thing again, right? It's people are, what if something goes belly up, and I'm not talking about dealing with Bank of America, who's FDIC insured, and my money's fine. It's not going anywhere, even though I don't see it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's another example of where it's a bit of a barrier to widespread acceptance.
100%.
Which is kind of funny because the whole purpose of the technology is to not have that be the case, right?
Now, from a single person perspective, like you or I, right, in our personal exchange accounts, whether it's Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini, the user interface is very friendly. It's kind of easy to understand once you kind of play around with it for a little bit. But you're right. From a corporate standpoint, it's still in process of being built out. Now, that does lead me to my next point, which is a custodial wallet, right? So you can have like an institutional type wallet where they do have some of those, I'll say, controls, features built out. When you think of multi-signatures, where you need two people to sign the transaction to say, hey, it's good to go, you always want to check that it's going to the right person, right? So you typically want to send maybe even a test transaction. If it's your first time, I'll send 0.0001 Bitcoin just to see if it ends up at the right spot, confirm it with that, my vendor, my customer.
Smart way to think about it.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that. It's very commonplace. Before you send your whole lot out, just make sure that it's the right place. Because the wallet addresses, the accounts, they look on the surface and it's very confusing, and you could lead to a typo, right? Human error is inevitable at some points. So you want to try and mitigate that as much as possible. So that's where kind of having two eyes or two sets of eyes, double check these things is also important. But yeah, I mean, there's understanding when you think of what those types of wallets offer, right? And everyone has that negative connotation when it comes to crypto of, yeah, if I have my coins, they're going to get hacked, or if Bitcoin's getting hacked, right? What does it mean when people say Bitcoin's getting hacked? Like, that's a bogus statement. It's not true. It's an exchange was hacked and Bitcoin was compromised from that exchange's holdings. The network is not hacked. Personal Bitcoin's not being hacked. It's the exchange. Think of it like the bank was robbed. It's very similar to that. So you need to really understand kind of the connection between digital assets and where they're being held. The ethos that's been said around crypto ever since I've been in this space since about 2015 now, has been not your keys, not your coins, right? So if I'm holding my assets on an exchange at a third party, a custodian, that it's the same type of as holding your money at a bank, right? So if a bank goes belly up, right, I lose all my money. I mean, obviously there's FDI insured limits.
Yeah, but you're not feeling any better, I'll tell you, until you know exactly. That money is found or is in your possession somehow, right?
Exactly. So that's where I get comfort with the cold storage piece of this when it comes into crypto.
It's kind of funny that we get all these breaches in the news all the time, and I mean, I don't even think twice about it. I'm like, okay, yeah, Target was breached, or this was breached, or that was breached. It's like, you get numb to it after a while. So I mean, if we're all, I don't say accepting, but we've all gotten adjusted to that, why not, start to put a little bit more faith into this community and have it get to a point where it is more widespread, right? I mean, there's always these great ideas in technology take a while to get accepted right in the mainstream. I mean, just starting to use smartphones with GPS built into them, things like that. People can know where you are at all times. Nobody cares. Nobody thinks twice about it, right?
It's important to note that I think as the market's matured, kind of where we are today to where we were 6-7 years ago, with a lot of the larger market cap tokens out there, when a hack does happen, when an exchange gets compromised, I don't think it has much an impact on the price, the volatility piece of it, as it used to have, right? Because it's more decentralized, I think, from that standpoint, where those things are inevitable to an extent, right? You're going to have bad actors in play, no matter the asset class, but I think it's important to note that that's kind of been the negative connotation that we're starting to get away from, I think, as the market matures a little bit.
Like we said, and we say on a lot of calls we have with people, is that in my experience, the folks that we talk to are just trying to do the right thing and understand how the rules work, right?
Yep.
They're in this space for the long haul. They want to maximize their investment or their use of the technology, and they want to make sure they're doing it the right way. Right, and they're not trying to circumvent the rules.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And like I said, anyone here in the audience, if you have any questions on this process, we've been fielding this call for a while now, especially as the asset class has matured. It's an important piece. I think it's going to become more and more important as it just continues to evolve. Right, there's more and more opportunity in this space. So definitely happy to have any questions, any comments, any secondary conversations. We're always here to help.
Maybe we make a little offline bet and trade some digital assets over who wins the first game of the year between our squads, Mark. Huh? Your Eagles are 3-0,
I don't have
but
any Eagles hats to hold up.
our 2-0 Giants with a couple of squeaky wins. We'll see what happens. So we won't be friends the 2 times a year that we play you this year. So I just look forward to that day. Or maybe I don't. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Eagles are hot right now.
Yes, that is true. Oh no, this was recorded. That's gonna be saved forever now that I said that, huh? I take it back. They're not that hot right now. No.
Perfect.
Cool. So, use the forum. Send us questions. Time permitting, we'll be answering as many as we can. And you can always ask us my information, Mark's information on our website, and we're happy to have any conversation that anybody wants to about this. So thanks for listening. Appreciate everybody's time.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
All views expressed in this podcast by Mark Eckerly or his guests are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Withum. This podcast is for informational purposes only.